So, it's the month of June, and unfortunately 2020 has not treated us too kindly. The COVID-19 pandemic has cancelled or postponed many things that we like, such as the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is now slated to run in September instead of its traditional slot in June. It is also Pride Month, a time during which the LGBTQ+ community is celebrated. Unfortunately, for just the same reason, Pride parades across the world have fallen by the wayside. But never fear, because Jack McKenzie is here. Just because Pride parades cannot be enjoyed this year doesn't mean that the members of the LGBTQ+ community that have inspired others can't be celebrated. So, as is my remedy for everything, we're going to be talking about motorsport. Specifically, Hurley Haywood. Now, I should admit that this story also exists in the form of a documentary and an autobiography, but if you don't want to pay $3.99 to watch the doco, here's the short version. Hurley Haywood was born in Chicago in 1948. His motorsport career began in 1968 while he was studying in Florida, driving a Corvette at slalom events. At one of these events, he met Peter Gregg, a racing driver who owned the Jacksonville Porsche dealership, also known as Brumos. Gregg saw potential in Haywood, as he'd actually managed to beat him at this particular event. The two got talking, and within a month, they were planning to race at the 1969 6 Hours of the Glen in a Porsche 911S. So, Haywood rocked up at Watkins Glen alongside Gregg with only a NASCAR license that he'd purchased for $20. Here was a man who had never raced above club level, rocking up at one of the biggest races in America, and indeed the world. Surely this was a recipe for disaster. Amazingly, it wasn't. Gregg and Haywood finished 8th overall for Brumos and took the class win as well. And so began one of the greatest partnerships in sports car racing. However, that partnership would have to wait, because Haywood was drafted to Vietnam. When Haywood returned from Vietnam, he and Gregg resumed their partnership, entering the GTU class for the 1971 IMSA GT Championship, winning every single race bar one and the GTU Championship. In 1972, Haywood would become the sole GTU champion after Gregg missed a few rounds. However, it wasn't just the success in the IMSA GT Championship that Haywood was known for. It was the big races like Le Mans, Sebring, and of course the Daytona 24 Hours. In 1973, he and Gregg would win the 24 Hours of Daytona in a Porsche Carrera RSR. That same year, they would win the 12 Hours of Sebring alongside Dave Helmick, a race that Haywood would also go on to win in 1981. He would also win the Daytona 24 Hours in 1975 and 1979. He would later win the race in 1991. To this day, Haywood remains the most successful driver at Daytona alongside Scott Pruitt. Haywood first ran at Le Mans in 1977 alongside Jackie Ickx and Jürgen Barth in a Porsche 936 and won on his first attempt. He would also go on to win the race in 1983 and 1984. As a result of winning these races, Haywood is now one of 12 drivers to have achieved the Triple Crown of endurance racing, a list that also includes Phil Hill, Dan Gurney, AJ Foyt, Jackie Ickx, and more. It wasn't all smooth sailing for Haywood during his racing career though. In 1980, at the Paul Revere night race at Daytona, Haywood and Gregg fell out. This had come after Gregg had suffered an injury as a result of a car accident prior to the 1980 24 Hours of Le Mans. Gregg was unable to compete in the race that year because he failed the pre-race medical. He and Haywood flew back to the US after the race, and 3 weeks later were at Daytona. Prior to qualifying, Gregg said he didn't feel well. Haywood was tasked with qualifying the car and he put it on pole. However, the race didn't go to plan and they finished third. Gregg accused Haywood of making him look bad, and the pair didn't speak to each other for 5 months. Haywood was also thrown out of the Brumos team until one day Gregg invited him around for lunch and discussed with him his plans to go racing in IndyCar. However, these plans never exactly materialized, as the following morning Gregg bought a gun and committed suicide. Gregg had been struggling with various mental health issues that culminated in the worst way possible. Naturally, this traumatic event would have been difficult for anyone. Haywood had been racing with Gregg for more than a decade, but it didn't seem to stop his racing success. As mentioned earlier, he would go on to win Le Mans an additional 2 times after that, Daytona once more, the 1988 Trans Am title, start several IndyCar races, and win many more races. Haywood's last race was the 2012 24 Hours of Daytona. in which he finished third in class, an impressive end to an astounding career. So far, we have established that Haywood has won Le Mans and Sebring multiple times, as well as the fact that he is the joint most successful driver ever at the Rolex 24. He is arguably one of, if not the most successful sports car driver ever. Not to mention that he is also a war veteran, which is not something that you see every day. But after all of this, we haven't gotten to the real reason I decided to bring him up during Pride Month. Because most of what I've told you were only statistics and only half of his story. For you see, Haywood was seemingly everything that people loved about racing drivers during the 70s and 80s. He was fast, he was good looking, and with Penthouse as a sponsorship deal, he would have a woman by his side in victory lane, meaning that he was a ladies' man. Or was he? Well, he fit the brief for two of those things. It was perhaps one of the best kept secrets in motorsport. People within the racing community knew, but the public did not. Bear in mind, it was a different time, and had this secret gotten out, it could have cost Haywood his sponsors and subsequently his race seat, particularly considering his partnership with Penthouse. Hurley Haywood was gay. He silenced any questions about his personal life by driving fast and proving himself out on track. And for the entirety of his racing career, his secret was safe from the public eye. It wasn't until years after his career ended that the world learnt the truth. One day, Hurley Haywood was sitting down with a high school student for an interview for a project. They talked about his racing career, as you would do, his time in Vietnam, and his more recent roles as a spokesperson for Brumos after the end of his racing career. Everything was normal until the student said this: "I have been bullied my entire life. Every morning when I wake up, I think about suicide. I have absolutely no respect for myself." The student was gay, and so was Haywood. Haywood responded with this: "Listen, it's not what you are, it's who you are. That's what people remember." A few years later, the student's mother called Haywood and thanked him for saving her son's life. Having realized the positive impact that his story had on others, Haywood published his autobiography in 2018 titled Hurley from the Beginning, in which he publicly came out as gay. Hurley Haywood is living proof that being part of the LGBTQ+ community or not makes no difference to how successful that you can be in a field like motorsport. Times have changed since Haywood was covering up his identity during the 70s and 80s, and now there are more LGBTQ+ drivers out there who are absolutely killing it on tracks such as Charlie Martin, Abby Eaton, and Sarah Moore. If nothing else, Haywood has served as an inspiration to people who really need someone like him, and that's one of the reasons why he's so special. Also, on a nice note, Haywood now lives with his husband, Stephen Hill. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in today. I do recommend going and watching the documentary and reading Haywood's book, as they'll probably go into greater detail on some of the stuff that I've talked about today, and probably bring up some stuff that I missed. Leave any of your thoughts in the comments below, as I do read all of them. As you may as well say something, and I will most likely respond to you. All the socials are in the description below, including the T-Star Instagram, Twitter, and Discord server, as well as my personal Twitter. Please go check those links out if you haven't already done so. Happy Pride Month to all my LGBTQ+ fans and friends. Anyway, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.